Okay, welcome to Fixing Starter Problems with Ronnie Trost. I just got out of bed, so my hair is all messed up. Mechanic stuff, who cares, right? Gonna be underneath the car in a few minutes. No reason to jump in the shower or nothing like that. So I just went through a lot of problems with my diesel truck with the starter, which I haven't really seen much videos on how to deal with it. I kind of had to invent the whole thing myself, as usual. So most of this, now the project for me is finished. So I can't show you the process with the video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the process on paper. And I could show you the finished product. But I'm not taking it back apart. Every time you unscrew things and put it back together, you wear more on the bolts and take another chance of stripping something. So it's working good, so I'm not taking it back apart. But so the problem starts out with the fact that my 1983 diesel 6.2 liter Detroit diesel engine. Now they used a very big starter. So apparently to start a diesel engine, you need a bigger starter than a normal car. So what happens is it's very powerful. And they didn't really make that big of bolts to contain that much power. So what happens is that once that starter is not properly aligned with the flex plate, or if it's a clutch, you would say the flywheel. So flywheel goes on a manual transmission, and a flex plate goes on an automatic transmission. But they both have the similar teeth. So once it's not properly aligned and it starts grinding, what happens is it puts a lot of pressure on the bolts that are holding it up. So what happens is it can break those bolts. So if you even get like a little bit of a grind, you need to go under there and fix it, because it'll save you a lot of problems in the future. Okay, so what happened with me originally, like when I got the truck, it used to crank perfect. But then I put a new transmission in. The transmission went out. So I put a new one in from PATC, Performance Automatic Transmission Company, online. They make some good transmissions, but I don't get paid for this advertisement. So I put the flex plate that came with the truck already had some wore down teeth. So I wound up seeing that, because it would grind and then work and then grind and then work. So I said, I'm just going to get a new flex plate. So I wound up separating the transmission from the engine again and got a new flex plate. So that was years ago, but somewhere, whether the starter went out, that's the beginning of the problem, is the original starter goes out. So you get another starter. Now the problem with this truck is the fact that the new starter is now 40, at this point, it's 42 years different. And like they're going to make starters for cars. Like the same starter could be the same starter for a Ford and a Chevy and all of these different vehicles. So they want a starter that's like a universal starter that does like 20 or 30 different trucks. But when you do that, it's not OEM, original equipment manufacturing specifications. And it took me a while to figure that out. So what happens is that if you go to AutoZone, now what I always do is I always buy the lifetime warranty, which saves you a lot of money. If you plan on keeping your old truck like a classic and it's four-wheel drive, it's diesel, you want to keep it as a classic for years and years, you always get AutoZone. I'm not getting paid by AutoZone either, but I always go to the same place because then I don't have to try to remember where did I buy this part, even if I have to pay a little more, because they have it on their computer. They have stuff on the computer from when I was 16, which was like 45 years ago. Lifetime warranty. Some of those cars I don't have anymore. But you get the lifetime warranty starters and brake pads and, alternators and all this stuff. And then 10, 15 years later, what I paid $100 for a starter is now $300. So that saved me a lot of money. I actually just got two starters for two different cars. And one was $200 and one was $300. That's $500 in savings in 1 week. So coincidentally, two starters went out at the same time. But so I get the starter. Well, years ago, when I got the starter and I bolted it up, it would grind. So I took it back and, if you go on the computer, there's like 5 different options. There's these different letters. There's like DL something, and then this letter, and those letters, and those numbers. So I'm like, well, this must be the wrong one. Let me try this other one. Still grinds. Well, that must be the wrong one. Let me try another one. That still grinds. Right, back and forth. Install, uninstall. Finally, I figured out with some various like washers and that's supposed to be like the first thing they tell you when the starter grinds is that use some shims. It's always use some shims, right? Which essentially makes the teeth farther apart. Well, that's not always true. Okay. If the starter is at an angle from the torque flex plate, using a shim on one side could actually make it closer, even though you're adding more material to separate them, because it's turning it on one side. Because one side it's pivoting, it actually makes it closer. And so there's different ways where you can make it closer and farther away by adding or subtracting shims on each side. Which is why this video is basically engineering scientific process of getting your starter to work right. You have to understand that this is a science. Okay, this is not this part works, this part don't work. This is science of aligning the teeth of the starter to the flex plate or torque or flywheel. So essentially I got it to work. It would grind and work as it went around. So like the flex plate is kind of moving, like it's a little warped, right? So in this warp spot, it works. In this unwarped spot, or whatever you want to call it, it grinds. So essentially, I figured out that if I line it up, I had a mark like you would use a timing mark on the flywheel, and you get the big ratchet on the bolt going into the front pulley on the crank, and you can move the whole engine to match up your line where it would grab it good, and you spray a little bit of starting fluid, not much, just a little into the intake, and that little bit of working gets the engine started. But if it wasn't lined up, it would grind. So every time I started the truck, I had to line up the the mark. I had a mark on the engine and then a mark on the flywheel. Well, I don't know why I said flywheel. I had a mark on the engine and a mark on what's behind the pulley, the little weight that's between the pulley and the engine. I'll think of it in a minute. So just like a timing mark, but basically I lined up the two marks. Then I went, sprayed a little teeny weeny bit of starting fluid, got in the truck, cranked it, and it would start without me grinding it. So I did that for years, and then I just leave it run all day until I came home. You know, you can leave it run, just leave it. I gotta leave it run in the shopping mall, parking lot, or whatever. Just lock the doors and just leave it run like an 18-wheeler all day until I came home. And I did that for years. Well, I didn't drive it every day, but I did it for years. I do go work on tree trimming jobs and things like that. So it just run all day. Finally, it just grind the whole time. I couldn't line it up anymore. And so I took the starter and I went to AutoZone and I said, okay, it's been like 5 years. I want a new starter. Okay. So I got a brand new, beautiful $300 starter from AutoZone. And it just grinds. As soon as you put it together, it's like the worst sound in the world, even worse than a teacher scratching their fingernails across the chalkboard, is to hear your starter just grinding away. And you're like, that's the worst sound I ever heard. Because you're shearing off pieces of metal and stuff, like little particles. I mean, not a lot, but I mean, it's slowly grinding away. Okay, so that's where we start. We start with the fact that you bought a brand new starter and all it does is grind. And you don't know why. So I even looked it up on Google. Make sure it's the right starter and things like that. Actually, first Google told me my starter number was for a Ford. And I thought that's why it's grinding, because it's made for a Ford. So I took it back up to AutoZone, and they're like, no, it's for your car, for your truck. I said, Google said it was for a Ford. And he said, they're the same starter. So I looked it up on Google AI to show the guy at AutoZone, and then Google AI changed its mind and said, no, that's the perfect starter for my truck. And I'm standing there with the guy going, this thing does nothing but grind. You can't tell me it's the perfect starter for my truck. He's like, yeah. And he looked up like comments and all this stuff. He's like, yeah, man, people love that starter. That's the best starter you can get for your truck, man. That's a great starter. I said, let me see a different one. We got a different one. It was basically the same, you know, we tried to measure the teeth and stuff, and it's like basically the same starter. I said, show me the one for the Chevy, show me the other one, you know, the little numbers. I said, let me show you, let me see basically the same starter teeth, the same distance. I said, okay, I'm going to take it back home, and I'm going to figure it out. So, you know, this is where we start. We start with a starter that doesn't do anything but grind, and you don't know why. Okay? Now, we also have to remember that we have some broken bolts holding the starter up. Okay? What are we going to do with those? They're broken inside where the starter bolts up. There's broken bolts inside there. That when I started it, I mean, I had already started this process before. So, some of the bolts are stripped, some are broke. It's like you're at a place where you're like, this is impossible to get this truck started at this point. Virtually impossible. This is a complete disaster. But when you're the type of person like me, a scientist, you're like, okay, I'm going to figure this out. I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't know what I got to do. But I have money invested in this truck. I like this truck when it's running. Four-wheel drive, diesel, no car payments, new transmission, engine runs perfect. I'm going to figure this out. You know, people talk about, oh, you know, this guy has an engineering degree. You know, back in the old days, engineering is just you design a part, you put it on the vehicle, and you see if it works. That's engineering. You draw a diagram, you cut it out, you put it on the car. That's basically where we start. We start with the fact that nothing lines up and everything is broke. And we're going to engineer this truck to start. Okay? Now, underneath my truck, it's an 83 K-5 Blazer, four-wheel drive, diesel. Okay. Now, in this particular vehicle, there's 2 bolts for the starter. And then there's a clip for the back of the starter. So, this one in particular, I call that number 1. And this one's number 2. They're offset, so they're not in line. So like the starter, it's kind of like this. Okay. So this one is offset to the engine. The one here that's offset, it goes into the engine in a slope, and here's the bolt. So you can't drill all the way through. You'll be drilling into the engine. The number two, it's kind of weird shape, but you can drill all the way through without hurting the engine. Okay, so it comes out on the outside of the engine. If you drill into one, you go into the engine. So you can't drill through. You can drill through two, but you can't drill through one. Okay, it just has like a little hump on the side of the engine. Like if this is the engine, it's like a little hump. So if you drill into it, you drill into the engine. No, that's not a perfect diagram, but it's similar to what I'm trying to say. So okay, I'm going to show you what, try another page. I'm going to show you what you're dealing with. Okay, so let's say this is the flex plate. Okay, and well, actually, these are not very pointy, so they're flat. Like even on a fairly new one, they're flat. Okay, they don't come to a point where you would like cut yourself. The starter then is supposed to go like this. Okay. The flex plate has little flat ends on the triangles at the end of the gears. The starter, they're kind of pointy, but they're not like real pointy. But what happens is the starter is not close enough. So instead of going in between, it's going on the end. And it's pushing the flex plate that way, and it's pushing the starter that way, because they're like coming like this, and then they're pushing each other out. Now it actually turns the flex plate for a few minutes, but it's not turning it correctly because they're not engaging as gears. They're just pushing each other like this. So this one, then this one, and then this one. But see, what that does is it pushes, you have a high, powerful starter for a diesel engine, so it's putting stress on your bolts, your starter bolts. Okay, so you have two starter bolts. The stress, maybe not the first time, but 2 or 3 times into it, breaks the bolts. Because, you see, so when the bolt breaks, it breaks in this area that you can't drill through. So it's broken inside of here, So now you have to drill it out and tap the threads. Okay. Now, in reference to bolt 1 and bolt 2, bolt 1 you have to tap. Bolt 2 you can drill through. Now, the reason why I'm explaining that to you, it's very difficult to drill in the hole 1. So it's like this. Okay. You're going to drill. First of all, you have a broken bolt up in here, right? Very difficult to drill into here to get the old bolt out. And then you go on to Google and you can ask it. You can ask it what size bolt. So you're going to go to Amazon and buy 2 starter bolts. You may not use the one, but at least you'll have an extra one in case something happens. Okay, so I'm going to put that over here. And it's always good to get new starter bolts because the older they are, the more stress and strain has been put on them and the more they're likely to break. So it's always better to get 2 new starter bolts. And it's always better, it's okay to get them a little bigger than what you're using by 1/4 inch maybe. Okay, so when you drill this out, I'll show you the kit here in a second. When you drill this out, if your bolt has broken off, you don't want to use the drill bit they gave you right away because that's going to get dull too fast. So you get your drill. I even had to buy a new drill so it would fit up in there. There's not a lot of space. You start with a small drill bit. Then you go a little bigger, a little wider, a little wider, a little wider. And then finally you use the one that they gave you. Okay, which is this one. And I put a mark on there to determine how deep I want to drill, which basically was as far as I could get before it basically wouldn't go much deeper. And then this drill bit fits with this tap and die, which you could just use a socket on the end. And you tap and die some new threads into that spot. And then you use the kit, which to get one of these little springy things to screw up in there. You know, you put that on there like that. You screw it in there. I know it's blurry, but you know I'm using this stupid webcam, so it has a little piece of metal on one side that you put, and you screw that in there. Now once you screw that in there, it's supposed to break it off, but because there was no space, like the back end wouldn't break off. But that's okay. It worked anyway. So let me put all this back together. So this is a kit I bought on Amazon. It goes down in there. Okay. So you can buy this. Where did this thing go? Something went wrong. Okay, this one goes here. This one goes in. So I bought this kit. For me, it was a 3/8 with a 16. Can't see that, can you? But anyway, you buy the kit that matches your bolt. Okay, that's the... If you have a different car, it might be a different size bolt. That's the gist of it. Now that bolt works good, but it may be too long for the starter. So you got the starter, and then you got the bolt, right? So let me move it over here. Okay. Here's the hole. Here's the starter. Now your bolt is a little longer, so here you put some washers to make it tight. Okay. Oh, you can't even see what I'm making. Okay. Okay. Here's the hole. Here's the bolt. This little rectangle is the starter. The bolt's a little long, so you put washers, and that's fine to put the washers between the bolt and the starter to make sure that this is snugged up tight. Okay, now the other one, what I did, okay, for bolt number 2, because I can drill all the way through, you can go to Ace Hardware and get you a long threaded bolt. Get some matching nuts and washers, and you can put it all the way through. The only thing was, because the top was crooked, I had to put a piece of triangle at the top so that the bolt, because when you drill all the way through, the top is like at an angle. So but this, I only have to put the nut on. Okay, I don't have to do all of this drilling and tapping. I just gotta, it goes all the way through, so I could just put a nut on each side. Put a nut up here, a nut down here. It actually can move around inside, back and forth a little bit, so it's not the same as that one. That's a tap and die. This is just a bolt going straight through. Since this was so hard to do, I didn't want to have to do it again over here. So I'm like, why go through that whole process if I don't have to? Okay. So that's your 2 bolts. Now, in the back of the starter, I'll just draw it on here. So if this is the starter, in the back, there's a little clip that you bolt to the engine to keep the tail from moving around. I don't really think that does too much, but it's always good to have a little extra support, even though at some point it's not absolutely necessary, but it's just a little extra support that they made. Now, if you don't have one, There's always some good steel. If you ever see those bed frames that are made out of steel, they look kind of like this. And you put your box spring on there. Okay. It looks like this. You put your box spring on there, and this is just a steel. It's got, like legs on the bottom. I'll show you outside, but this is some good construction steel you could build things with. But right on the end, there's a little L, and the L has like already holes cut into it. So from the side, I keep thinking you can see all this stuff, but where was it? L? Okay. So from the side, it looks like that, but from the top, it looks like that. But anyway, by cutting the end off of one of these bed frames, it sort of matches the piece that bolts to the back of the starter up to the engine block. So it gives you an easy way to construct that part. So this is, let's go over it again in case you could, I don't know where the camera was at. This is the bolt I bought at Ace Hardware. Nut and washers on each side. I had to construct a triangular piece of metal with a hole in it so it matched the top. Bolt on the bottom. Other one, tap and die. The inside one, tap and die. Okay, so you get all that done, and you end up with something like this, okay, where they're turning a little, and then they're grinding. Turn a little, grind, because they're too far apart. Okay. So when they tell you shims, putting shims in here is going to make it farther apart. And it's just going to grind even more. Okay. So eventually, since the AutoZone guy is like, no, I'm not returning it because it's the right one. And it's the same number that the computer says is for your truck. There's other people saying it's going to work, so I'm not returning it anymore. This is the starter that you have to use for your warranty. You have the starter, right, which has a rounded nose cone, and here you have the teeth, right, and I guess a solenoid up here. Well, these teeth are too far apart from the engine block, according to the previous diagram. When you take it back off and you bring it into the shop, what you have to do is you flip it upside down. So this part is kind of separate. And this kind of looks like that. So it's the opposite of what I was showing you before, because now the starter is upside down. So you'd have to take an angle grinder, your angle grinder, this is the cord, plug it in. You plug the cord into the angle grinder, have a grinding wheel, and you have to grind this down. Okay? And what that's going to do is it's going to bring the teeth closer to the why am I saying flywheel? Yeah, flex plate, flywheel. Now that doesn't mean that doing a straight grind is going to be the best option. Reason being, okay, okay, this is the flex plate. And the starter, you know, it's going to go like that. So like this nose is going to go past the flex plate. And then the teeth, right? These teeth are supposed to match here. But, oh no, this is going to be kind of hard to explain. Where's a good spot? Up here? Okay. Let's say this is the flex plate. Right? The starter may go under a little bit crooked from the manufacturer. Now, if this is the starter, and this is the flex plate, by adding washers, or what they call shims, but washers could be used as shims, you're tilting it. You're tilting it so that it's more even. Even that's not really good enough. Okay, it's more even. You see that? So your original ones, you know, straight from the manufacturer at AutoZone, you bolt it up, it's crooked. And the teeth are too far away. But by adding shims to one side, you're making it more level so the teeth actually get closer. Even though you're adding shims, right? Because you're changing the angle. Okay? Now, you can change the angle with the shims, which I tried doing that. But the teeth are still too far away. And the way I know that is because it cranks a little, then it grinds. Then it cranks a little, and then it grinds. I thought that the teeth were the wrong shape to fit into, like, you know, in order for this to match, but let's say these are too close together, too far apart, they don't match. So it would like match here, but then not match here. Well, you can't see. Well, you can kind of. Okay. Like one tooth would match, but if it wasn't the right distance, the next tooth. That's what I thought was happening. That's why, like, you gave me a Ford instead of a Chevy or whatever. But that wasn't really the problem. That was just me thinking that was the problem. But what was really the problem was that back to the original, you know, more precise view of the flex plate, right, is it was hitting here, here, and then the teeth would come out and hit here. And the reason it was doing that is because, number one, it was too far away. Like it's just barely hitting here, but then at this tooth it's too far away. So it's like working, grinding, working, grinding. But basically, in general, it's too far away. Okay? And it's very, at this point, it's very frustrating. So what I did was I got the grinding wheel and I ground it some more. And I would put it back on the truck and I'd try it. And it basically did the same thing over and over. So what I was doing was, if you get a screwdriver while it's on the truck and you put it here, you could push these out, you know. So what happens is when you crank it, the teeth come out here. And that brings them to the flex plate. And you can see how deep into these triangles that it goes. And I would grind it, and let's see, let me draw some more. These are the flex plate teeth. And it would go like this. And then I'd grind it some more, and it would go like this. And then I'd grind it some more, and it would go like this. Okay, a little bit more each time. Now, each time I'm doing this, I have to remove the starter. So you remove the starter, you grind some of it down, you put it back. Still not deep enough. Take it back apart, grind the starter with the grinding, grind it here. Now you can even, now remember when we go back to it not being square, right? I mean, ideally you want it perfectly square. Okay? So, when you realize that it's not perfectly square, and the way, okay, sometimes in the starter they give you a little kit, and there's this rod, and then there's these shims, right? The shims kind of look like something like that, right? You got the shims and this rod. It's like a little shim kit. So I saw this online. Not sure how well this is going to work for you. I didn't do it, but this is the theory behind supposedly, if this is right, if this is in the right distance, okay, so the starter, this is the starter. This rod I don't know how to explain this. Okay. This rod here should do that. So I guess because the teeth are back at this point. Well, let me just mention, before you start anything, disconnect the battery. Because every time this giant thing touches metal, it's going to create a huge spark. But the teeth are back. So this rod, this little rod they give you, should fit between the flex plate teeth and the flat part of the starter. Okay, so then here's the teeth for the starter. So this rod, but you see how that's flat? Like so when I got the starter, you can't even, are you even seeing what I'm making here? Okay. When I got the starter, if you tried to put that metal in, that bar that came with the kit, right? This bar here, it would have been crooked. So instead of it doing this, it would do something like that. Not, the teeth could still touch, right? When you crank it, but then not the way that it's supposed to. I said all that to tell you that, okay, so what that means is depending on which way depending on which way this is tilting, right? That's the side that you grind more of. Let's say this side has, okay, this is too far away compared to this one. So this side has more metal, right? This has less metal because it's closer. So you have to go in your mind and you have to figure out, okay, so let's say you figured out that this one, well, in my case, this one had too much metal and this one had not enough metal. So when I'm grinding more. It's like you're grinding on a like a ramp, but you're grinding more on this side and less on this side. So you're doing like 2 or 3 passes here and then a little pass there, and then 2 or 3 passes here and then a little pass there, so that you're bringing it back to level slowly. I'm not sure if that made sense to you, but then you get a straight edge, you know, some type of straight edge ruler to make sure, you know, you put it on there to make sure you're cutting a straight line. Because if you have like a hump in the middle, right, or you did too much on this side and too much on this side, then it's going to rock back and forth. Like when you put the starter in, it's going to rock back and forth because there's a hump in the middle. So then you got to shave more down in the middle, right? So, I mean, it could have a slight curve in. It just shouldn't have a slight curve out, because then that's going to cause your starter to rock. So you're using this grinder to basically shape this metal on the starter to the perfect, you know, the perfect distance of the teeth. So adding shims and adding shims is just going to bring the teeth farther apart, except for the where I told you before, where it's making it more straight. But even if you made it straight and it's still grinding, you're still too far apart. So you can't add no more shims. You got to start grinding down the starter. And so when you think of it as when you go to the gym, you're like, okay, I'm going to do some bench pressing. I'm going to do a set of bench pressing. So when you work with this starter, you may have to install it and uninstall it 20 times. But this is what you do when you're a professional mechanic and you're engineering this part to fit, is you got to have the patience and the strength. Like, you don't have to do it every day. That's why you have like 2 or 3 different classic cars you can drive until this project is finished. You could do like 3 or 4, work on it for a few days, take a few days off, work on it for a few days, take a few days off. So you're not like getting frustrated. When you take a day off or 2, you can start in fresh. It gets late, it gets dark, it's hard to find the tools. Just box it up, wait a day or 2 till you're fresh, get back under, do it again. Might have to do that 3 or 4 or 5 different times. You're engineering a part, so don't get frustrated, don't get angry, don't get impatient. You are a parts engineer, and you're going to do your job in a calm, professional manner, and however long it takes. If it takes a week, if it takes a month, if you can only work on the weekends or whatever, this is what you're doing. And if you do the way that I teach you, the truck will start perfectly. Like, you're going to go from a complete mess, strip bolts, everything gone wrong, grinding, shims don't work, to it working perfectly. And when it finally works perfectly, it's a beautiful thing to hear it just crank with no grinding. Perfect. Okay? So you grind a little. Like, I probably took off a 1/4 inch of metal. Okay? It's not exact. I'm not telling you to go measure a 1/4 inch of metal. What I'm saying is, I took the grinder and I grinded it, then I installed it, tested it, still too far away, took it off, ground some more, installed it, tested it, still too far away, took it off, ground some more, ground it in a diagonal. Okay, you can look and see how you can put your finger in there, assuming it's not going to start, you don't have some wires crossed. You can put your finger in there and just on the edge and just see how deep, how far away is this end from how far away is this end. Okay, this goes up to half my fingernail. This, my whole fingertip will fit in. So this is too far away. This is too close. So then, which side, you got to figure out with your mind, okay, which hole is too far apart and which hole is closer. And then the one that's closer is the one I got to grind more metal out to make this square. See, it's all done with science and geometry. Okay? So, like I said, when you test it and you're underneath there, okay, what you can do is, when you're bolting it up, you also have to bolt the wire And then you got another wire. The starter goes to the ignition, right? The battery should be completely disconnected. Then when you go, after you bolt it up, you go back up top, you connect the battery to the battery post. Okay? If you don't do that, every time this hits metal, it's going to make a big spark. So, but this wire that comes out from there that's hanging down, I mean, you can make one that's hanging down. You get a jumper cable from the battery, right? So your battery has a jumper from the positive to this wire, and you could put your head in there and look at, when you crank it, this pops out. It's supposed to line up, and you can look at what it's doing. Because when you first put it, this isn't lined up like this. It's separated. So what you could do is you could stick a screwdriver behind this spot, push it out, and see how deep into this it goes. And if it's not deep enough, if it's only on the very edge, that's not deep enough. You want this thing to be like that deep. Okay? Not all the way, because then you got the opposite where you got to put shims in because it's going in too deep. Because you got to remember, some of this is fluctuating. Like your torque, your flex plate could be fluctuating the distance. The starter could be fluctuating. So it may work perfectly here, but then not work perfectly here, because there's things moving around. Now, again, so what happens was, when you crank it with this battery wire, so you can look at it while it's cranking to see how deep this is going into the starter. I mean, into the flex plate. How deep does the starter, when it shoots out, connects with the flex plate, how deep in is it going, and what is it doing? So what I finally realized at the end was, I actually heard it crank really good. And I was like, wow. So the teeth do line up. That was my first thing. I didn't know if those teeth lined up. Like it was maybe for a different car or something. Well, when it did crank good, I thought, you know what? I think I solved the problem of grinding it down to the right spot. You don't want to overgrind it, because then you got to use shims. So I said, I'm going to grind it one more time, you know, sloping it the way I want it to slope. Put it back together, and at first it grounded a little bit again. But I could see the starter moving, okay? The starter was like you crank it and it's going. You got to remember, there's a lot of power in this big diesel starter. So I checked the bolts, and some of the washers were a little loose. So I tightened up these bolts a little more, because if they're a little bit loose, it's flexing. So I tightened it up a little bit more, and it cranked perfectly. And I started the truck. Okay. So sometimes you have to go under there and make sure that these bolts are tight. Like, you could almost do it every time you start the car. You go underneath it, you check the bolts, you make sure they're tight. Because what happens is, if they get a little loose, see, a diesel engine, that's one thing you got to learn about a diesel engine. A diesel engine vibrates more than a gas car. And so every bolt in the truck is vibrating, and it's getting looser. Unless it's really, really tight and snug. Not really, really where you strip it, but if not really, really, like you left the engine running all day like I do, sometimes they'll get a little loose, okay, because of the vibrations of the diesel engine. Now, when I go to start it again, the next time I start it, I don't want what I showed you before. Let me back the pages up. I don't want okay. I don't want this scenario to happen because the bolts got loose. Because if this scenario happens, you know, you'd run the truck all day, you take it home, you turn the engine off, you go to sleep, you wake up the next morning, and yesterday the bolts got a little loose. Don't have to be much, but they got a little bit loose. You run into this scenario where instead of them going like this, instead of them going like this, they go like this. And if they go like this, we're back to breaking the bolts because it's pushing the starter too far away for the bolts to hold any longer. So it's pushing them apart where you break the bolts. You don't want the broken bolts because then you got to go back to the tap and die thing again, which took me like 2 days to create a new bolt to screw in. So it's just a whole lot easier if you just go under the truck and make sure they're snug and tight. And you can even grab the starter. Okay. Here we have a picture of the starter. So you can grab the starter, you know, not while the truck's running, obviously, but you grab the starter with your hand and you see if it moves. If it moves a little, like that thing should be solid and not move at all. That's how tight like I don't torque them because I know I'll strip stuff. I get it tight and I say this is, you know, if you've been a mechanic a long time, you're like, this is tight, but it's not stripped. If that starter moves just a little bit when you grab it with your hand, you're going to run into that scenario again. So if you get up the next day and you go under the truck and it moves, then you tighten these 2 bolts. And you say somehow they got loose. But by doing that, it saves me breaking the bolt again. Because that little bit of this thing is so powerful. It's more powerful than a gas car. That it's breaking this bolt. But by going under the truck on a daily basis before you start it, and you make sure this bolt's tight, it won't move. It should crank perfectly. You see? This should all line up perfectly again like the original. So you get lazy and you're like, oh, it started the next day good. Oh, it started the next day. I'm not going to climb under there. You got lazy, and now one day when you wake up after all them vibrations, it breaks a bolt. And when it breaks the bolt, you have to get out the tap and die, take it all apart, put the tap and die back in there, because it the bolt broke off up in there, and do it all over again. So to me, just to lay under it every time I start it, make sure it's tight, saves me all of that trouble in the future. Okay. Now I'm going to go outside. Okay, this is the bed frame. You see? People throw this away, but this has some really good strong steel that's shaped in an L. And this is where I cut the piece off. Okay, I have an old starter here. This is not the starter that I was talking about, but it's a similar. This is a piece which almost fit that I cut off that bed frame, but it was a little too short, so I cut off another one. But see, it already has some holes in it and some different things that could line up, you know, something like that for the back of the starter. This wouldn't fit either, but I got. Now you want to understand the difference between, this is a cutting wheel. You're not using that. This is a grinding wheel. See, it's thicker. So what I was doing was I was grinding, you know, at an angle like I was showing you before. So like grind more down here, less up here, then more down here, then less up here, because it was at an angle. You know, this is an old starter bolt, but this is one of the things I bought at Ace Hardware. So like when I made the back part, I kind of folded this and designed where the holes were at, and then tried to match the holes up to the metal. What was I going to show you? Let's see. Oh, so when you're grinding, then you want a straight edge, you know, to make sure that there's not like a rounded, like it's going to rock back and forth, because there's, you know, if there's more material in the middle, then the starter's going to rock back and forth. So you want to make sure that that's straight, and then that way it's sitting on the block. And well, unfortunately, my neighbor turned on has the lawnmower guy out here. So this is the bolt that I did the tap and die, right? So got to do. If you look up in there, well, actually you can't see it, but that's the one that you can't drill all the way through because you go into the engine. This is the one that I got from Ace Hardware, like a long bolt, and you cut it, and then at the top, you know, I could at least go all the way through and put, it's easier to work with because you could always just tighten it up with the nut at the bottom without worrying about stripping anything. And if it falls out, you just go get another one without doing any tap and die. So I didn't do tap and die on that one. I just did it on this one. Okay. Then you go in the back, and there's that piece of metal that's shaped like an L. Okay. That I cut off the bed frame. And so, like I was saying, you take this wire here, you bring down a jumper cables, and all you need to do is hook the positive side of the jumper cable up, touch it to this wire. This wire I can disconnect with the cap, electronic cap. And if I touch the jumper cable to the end of that, instead of climbing in the truck and using the key, I can look at what's happening. Okay, so the teeth I can pull out with a screwdriver to see how deep into the flex plate they go. And you remember how I said that it has to be, the best is to have it level. So you can see where it's very hard to see the starter is now level with the flex plate, whereas before it was way crooked. So by the grinding method, I finally got it to line up correctly. And I actually don't have any shims. I have washers at the bottom, but there's no shims because the grind is now at the perfect spot. Okay. So you see there's no shims where it connects to the block. Okay. That bolt at the top is where I drilled all the way through. I don't know if you want to see like the electronic part, but so now what I want to do is before I start the truck, okay, I want to grab this and just see if I can move it. If I can move it, it's too loose. If it's too loose, I get the socket and I tighten this and the wrench and I tighten this one. See that? The other thing I had to do was remove this four-wheel drive. I pulled this U-joint out, put some electrical tape around so when they fall off, they won't fall off, in order to access the ability to work with the starter on a regular basis. So I dropped this four-wheel drive shaft down, and that's about it. And it'll crank perfectly right now if I wanted it to.